Well, good evening, my friends. How are you? Welcome to another edition of Wednesday Night Live with me, Mike Avery, here on many of my social media outlets. How are you this evening? So glad to have you along with us. Patrick, good evening. How are you? Appreciate you joining us. Kind of a special Wednesday Night Live. John Callison, how are you? When do you start the new job? Charles, good evening. How are you? Ross Elliott, buddy, nice to have you along with us, as always. Cliff, another friend of mine, Craig Plowman, how you doing, bud? Turn that music down just a little bit. Not that I don't like the music, but sometimes it gets in the way. Wednesday Night Live, something we've done every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock for several years now. Lisa, good evening. Oops, Lisa, good evening. How are you? Brian, how are you? Still got the cameras up on the lease property? Hey, Brent. Did you get a chance to paint any of those lures? You notice the color patterns I sent you were chartreuse and purple for the most part. John says you started last Monday, almost done with week number 2. Congrats. That CMU biology degree is going to do you well. Joe Kleeman, good evening. Michelle, Craig's better half. Charles says a little cold in Uperland tonight. I tell you what, Charles, it's a little cold downstate tonight too. I was just outside and I thought I gotta grab a hoodie. No, better yet, I'll go inside to my studio and we'll do a Wednesday Night Live. It's nice and warm in here. You're working on them right now, Brent, and you're going to give those away at the Walleye for Warriors event, if I remember right? Ross says 3 weekends till Canada. Ross, a couple of things have come up. I may not be going. I hope to, but I might not be going. Hey, Joe, how are you doing tonight? How are things in the North Country? Brent says, yes, indeed. He's going to give those baits away at the Walleye for Warriors event on Saginaw Bay out of Linwood Beach Marina, June 10th and 11th. Good evening, Dina. How are you? Nice to have you along with us on this edition of Wednesday Night Live. Brian, we have a ton of turkey in the food plots, several nice times. Food plots look good, growing in thick. Jim says, good to see you tonight. How's everything going? Yeah, Ross. It just, it is what it is, right? We'll see. We'll see what happens. I certainly want to go and I intend to go, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, my friends, thanks for joining me tonight on Wednesday Night Live. You know the routine by now. My name is Mike Avery, longtime Michigan outdoor broadcaster. Used to be in TV, now in radio, podcasting, social media, streaming, all this good stuff. But the goal remains the same: to talk about and encourage and promote the history and tradition of the great outdoors here in the great state of Michigan. That's what I am about, is promoting, encouraging hunting and fishing and shooting and trapping, trying to encourage people to get involved, or at the very least, if you don't want to get involved, to understand that what we do is viable and necessary, in my opinion, a God-given right, and also legal, right? And biologically sound. Hey, Bill, good evening. How are you? Yes, all is well here. David Bowler coming down. I'll be fishing Saginaw Bay Sunday and Monday. First time at Saginaw Bay. We'll go on Linwood. Hopefully the weather will cooperate. Have fun. You're going to catch fish. The bite right now is real strong. Of course, I don't have a boat yet. That could change tomorrow. Joe checking in again from the SVRC Marketplace in Saginaw. Raymond, good evening. How are you? Ted. Cliff, you come up with I got to be honest, you come up with the weirdest comments. I mean, like, really weird. To the point where you probably ought to dial it down a little bit, eh? That's my Canada voice. Hey, Brent, good evening. How are you? Vince, my pleasure. Appreciate you joining us tonight on Wednesday Night Live. All right, if you've listened to me at all before, you know that I take my partnerships very seriously. Mike, Michigan Outdoorsman, how are you tonight? I take my partnerships very seriously. I like to work with people who I respect, people who have the same mindset, and it's a bonus if it's somebody that I like. Well, the folks at MUCC, Michigan United Conservation Clubs, are a hardworking, very small group of people in Lansing, and I think they do a great job. We did a couple of Wednesday Night Lives last year with Amy Trotter, executive director of MUCC, and we decided at the time that this year we wanted to do one every quarter. We did one back first quarter. This is our second quarter Wednesday Night Live. So I'm going to bring in Amy Trotter, Executive Director of MUCC. But here's the cool part. I will ask her some questions, yes, but this is your opportunity to jump online and you can pose questions directly. Now, you might not have access to Amy on the street, in the office, but you've got access to her tonight. So I'm going to bring her in, and I would encourage you to ask her a question. Amy, good evening. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me again.
There we are. Always a pleasure. You're looking good tonight. How are things in your world?
They've been really busy. The legislature, never ceases. So something different every day. We are tackling a lot of internal stuff, trying to work on growing our membership. So all of your listeners should, of course, join MUCC if they like what they hear tonight.
Why, Amy? Why join MUCC? What is it all about, and what's the reason? Because we as hunters and anglers are usually kind of loners. We don't like to get involved. We're not joiners. I think in today's world, we don't have that luxury anymore, do we?
I think that's absolutely the case. MUCC has been around for 86 years now, and we have been representing hunters, anglers, and trappers and recreational shooters all around the state. Here in Lansing, in Washington, D.C., through the DNR, the Natural Resources Commission. By being a member, you have a voice in setting my marching orders here in Lansing and the kinds of things that I work on our behalf. So it's really important to actually be a part of the organization rather than outside just looking in.
And what are the things you're working on right now? I know it's always a myriad of things. You've got a lot going on, but what are the highlights right now, Amy?
Well, certainly, we are working on commercial hunting and fishing guides legislation, and this has been something that we've been working on for actually more than a decade. We are tracking a lot of different appropriations issues here in Lansing in terms of funding for the Asian carp barrier in Brandon Road Lock and Dam, and several others. We are trying to, follow and track every single gun-related bill that gets introduced, and make sure that our voices are represented in that process. And yeah, commercial fishing, the consent decree, you name it, we're probably working on it.
Kind of an aside here, real quick. How much to join MUCC? It's really pretty cheap, isn't it?
$35 a year.
$35 a year. Well, that's I don't know how you can charge so little in today's world, Amy. I got to be honest with you. All right. Oh, Arlen says nice. Oh, perfect. That's $35. That was enough. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about some of these issues. Consent decree. Oh, Ross said, here's a good question. Is there a lifetime membership?
There is actually $1,000 actually is our lifetime membership. You will then get our Michigan Out of Doors magazine for the rest of your life. And then there is a senior life membership as well for people over 65.
Well, I can't get the senior membership quite yet. Patrick says he's a new member of MUCC. Kendall says gun owners must be well represented. You have some examples of how that has happened right here in Michigan recently, don't you, Amy?
That's correct. As everybody probably knows, the governor and the legislature called for several different changes to our firearm laws, and those have been going through the process. A couple of the bill packages have now been signed and will become law, subject to court litigation, of course, but they will be implemented and go into effect next year. One of those is on safe storage, and we believe that, of course, people should be attending to their firearms and be responsible gun owners. But as far as MUCC goes, we believe that the best safety measure is education. Not to take guns away, but to teach people how to use them and how to act and how to understand what they are, what they can do, what they shouldn't do, all of those things. So unfortunately, this is one of those bills that MUCC was opposed to, as many gun owners were. But we were able to, even in our opposition, help the legislature to understand how specific things that they had in the bills originally were going to affect and actually make illegal some forms of youth hunting because it was going to require direct supervision or things that, and we just wanted them to be able to follow applicable hunting laws and ensure that, again, we weren't going to be overtly singled out as outdoor recreationists in this issue.
You say you wanted to, and you often help the legislators understand an issue. I'm going to ask you a question that may be unfair because I realize you walk a tightrope. You're in a fine line here. Do these legislators pushing for gun control really want to understand, or do they go in here saying, we want to get rid of guns, and this is the first step of doing so?
Well, I think I can't say the intent of everybody, so I don't want to speak on behalf of all 148 of our legislators. I do believe they think some of their bills were doing what they said they were doing, but when you read the words on paper, we said, actually, you're having some unintended impacts here. And they didn't fully understand that until we really stick our neck out and explain that to them. On one of the bills, originally as introduced, we would not have been able to loan out our shotguns and our rifles, which would have really hampered hunter safety. It would have hampered youth shooting leagues because, you know, not all the parents are present for their kids' shooting leagues and practices. Maybe they have a coach, maybe they have guardians, all of those things. But it would have really impaired how we do R3 here in Michigan, which not every hunter, brand new hunter, is going to go buy a gun for their first time to go hunt. So we did make sure to kind of roll that back. We made sure that they understood that if they truly did intend, which it ended up being a universal background check at purchase. So we're talking about at the time of transferring the gun permanently, you know, not at the time of possession or transport or all of those other things as it relates to long guns. So we had to kind of remind them what they said they were trying to do and then try to get the words to match on paper what they wanted or intended to do.
How did we end up with the gun storage? And let me back up a step. This is all framed under the heading of common sense gun laws, right? So when they frame it that way, it seems like if you're against what they're saying, you have no common sense and you're not against common sense gun laws. So we go in there a little bit of a disadvantage, and you guys have done a great job. So how did we end up, or at least so far, with the whole issue of storage? Because I know that was a concern of yours personally.
Yeah, on the safe storage bill, basically, if a minor is present or there's a reasonable belief that there may be a minor present, you're supposed to have your guns that are unattended locked up. So if they're in your hands, if you're using them, if they're within your arm's reach, I mean, I would consider that attended. But it's the unattended firearms that need to be locked up with a locking device or a locked box or container. So that's what the new law says. I wanted to make sure that as a firearm owner, my child simply touching a gun in my own home, I wasn't going to be automatically be able to be labeled with a misdemeanor. And we actually did fix that in the conversation. So really, there's no crime unless a youth acquires a firearm and then does something with it, whether they present it in public, take it to a school in an unlawful place, or they actually commit a crime with it that causes bodily harm or death. Those are the things that you can actually be penalized for. So it's really a secondary penalty now, not a primary penalty where someone could say, hey, you didn't lock up your guns, automatic misdemeanor. It was changed throughout the course of those deliberations.
If you're just joining us, folks, looking at your screen right now, my name is Mike Avery. I am on the left side of the screen. Amy Trotter is on the right side of the screen. She is the executive director of MUCC, Michigan United Conservation Clubs. Amy, Lisa, I don't know Lisa personally, but she's done a very, very good job of getting on here every week. And she has been reminding us about the Save Cornwall flooding in the Pigeon River Forest. Now, I put this up here and it kind of covers part of your face, but I want to make sure you've read this. MUCC involved in this at all?
It's something we're definitely tracking. And for her benefit, I'm actually from Sheboygan, so I am intimately familiar with this, getting talked to by my old high school classmates even. But yeah, the issue of dams, low head dams, non-hydro dams is a hot issue. And we know that we have a lot of work to do here in our state. Appropriations are tricky. You know, there may be 50 or 60 of these kinds of issues all across the state. So MUCC has a hard time saying this is the most important one that we need to devote appropriations to until our grassroots membership actually brings that forward to us. So we're certainly aware of it. We're tracking it, but it's a statewide issue. It's not just about Cornwall. And we do believe that we do need to have a community conversation about what the benefits of these reservoirs are. Certainly, I know it has phenomenal fishing. I have heard that from, you know, firsthand experiences, but there are lots of these kinds of scenarios. So we need to have a whole conversation about what we're going to do and bring some funding to bear and some criteria of when we should be fixing these and when we should be letting them go. So
Good evening. Thank you, Amy. Good evening, Johnny Bowler. How are you doing tonight, buddy? Amy, let me ask you this. How does, let me see if I can reverse this here. There we go. How does a girl who grew up in Sheboygan in northern Michigan end up leading the state's largest conservation group and one of the country's largest conservation groups? How did this all happen?
well, I was always exposed to hunting and fishing in my family. Certainly, it was present around me. I wasn't really actively a participant, though. I certainly learned about it. I loved science. I went to school to study science, actually chemistry originally. And then I found a passion in environmental science. So I learned a little bit about everything: fish, wildlife, forestry, soil, plants, all of it, a little bit of everything. And then I learned about policy. And that was really kind of a turning point. I thought I was actually going to be a soil conservationist for the USDA. That's what I thought I was going to do, go help with farmers' erosion problems. And then I got into this policy issue here in Lansing and found out that, you know, you can have a lot of statewide and even national effect through policy more than you can, you know, sort of farm by farm or parcel by parcel. And I really got involved in policy. I came to MUCC though 16 years ago now, so it feels like forever, because a position opened up and they were hiring on the policy team. And at the time, I was working for another organization where we did a lot of research, policy research. So we were sort of had a client and we would study an issue, we would look at what other states would do, we would put together recommendations, and then we'd hand them off. But we never got involved in that advocacy side, and that's what I missed, or I didn't know I wanted to do, but I really got that bug of wanting to see through those good ideas then into implementation and seeing things come start to become law that I've worked on. And I'm not a lawyer, so put that disclaimer out there right now. I am not a lawyer, but I have written laws. So
Well, good for you, Amy. I love hearing that story. By the way, reminder, folks, if you are watching us tonight, and you're watching us live, and it's about 7:18 right now. If you're watching us live and you have a question for Amy Trotter, she is the executive director of MUCC, Michigan United Conservation Clubs. Feel free to post those questions here right now. For example, Bonnie says, "I can tell you're passionate about conservation." Amy, you put so much time and so much effort into things. And speaking of putting efforts into an issue, what about consent decree?
yeah, so just a thumbnail sketch of the background here. We have a consent decree that really guides the interactions of tribal fishing here in our Great Lakes. And there was a treaty in the 1800s that really defines the waters of the Great Lakes, as we're talking about here, from Grand Haven north all the way around to Alpena, and then the eastern half of Lake Superior. So we have a consent decree with the 5 tribes and the federal government and the state of Michigan to define those treaty rights in the as it relates to commercial fishing. We've had the consent decree since 1985. In 2000, we made a lot of changes, and specifically in 2000, we made a real significant move to pull gill nets out of our Great Lakes and put trap nets in the hands of tribal fishermen, because we believe that lake trout were being adversely impacted. And there's a lot of reasons why lake trout were declining at the time. There's been invasive species. There's been lots of changes in our Great Lakes, but gill nets and that pressure those are lethal gill nets in our Great Lakes put on the lake trout population, it was necessary to roll back some of those gill nets to help to rehabilitate and restore our lake trout population. And unfortunately, we've been trying to renegotiate a new consent decree for the better part of the last 5 years. And the new proposal that is in the courts before the judge would actually put a lot of those gill nets back into our waters. So we are very concerned, and MUCC works with a great coalition called the Coalition to Protect Michigan's Resources. It's made up of the charter boat captains, the steelheaders, the Hammond Bay area anglers, and lots of other organizations. And we really need to stay in this fight. We are in the courts, and we are actually going to be presenting our objections to the judge this month. So we finally have our day in court, if you will, to really outline our 10 major objections to the consent decree proposal. And we hope he hears us out.
Boy, this has been going on forever, hasn't it?
It really has. Yes.
And you talk about issues that have been going on for a while. You say you've been working on the licensing process for hunting guides for a decade now. Why does that take so long? And what's involved in it?
Well, guides are licensed across the country. There is no shortage of different regulation schemes in different states. Some have really aggressive regulations, like in Maine, where it's a multi-year process. There's a test at the end. There's a mentoring program for new guides in Maine. We're not talking about that here in Michigan. We really don't have, though, any kind of regulation for our inland hunting and fishing guides. Of course, the charter boat captains are highly regulated through the Coast Guard, through the state, but we're talking about inland guides for hunting and fishing. There's virtually no oversight. So right now, a poacher could poach, lose their license, lose their gun, lose whatever, but guide as soon as they get out of jail, because there's really virtually no enforcement. So we're trying to start something here in Michigan that would require a guiding license. We're talking about a low bar of entry, basic CPR and first aid certification, which charter boat captains already have to have, of course, too. $50 a year, so $150 for a 3-year license, and no, flags on the background check in the last 3 years of felonies, poaching violations, hunter and angler harassment, those kinds of really significant violations that we don't want to make. We want to make sure that our guides are the utmost in professional, which we believe they are. And that's why we wanted to set this low bar to just really establish a baseline of how many guides do we even have in this state, but also to really raise the level of understanding of what kind of activities are they seeing in the woods and water too. So data collection is an important component of this legislation as well. So understanding how many, how many hours are they dedicated, and what are they seeing out there in terms of harvest, their client harvest. And that's just going to be another piece of the puzzle in scientific data collection and understanding of harvest and trends that we aren't currently collecting right now as a state.
Nick asked an interesting question. He said, "What's with the dead walleye left in nets on Saginaw Bay?" I did some investigation of this myself. In fact, I talked with the investigating officer who was responsible for investigating the case, and I was quite surprised to find out that there would be no citation. The guy did nothing illegal. But the thing that really stuck out with me, Amy, is there is no regulation to check trap nets for the state licensed anglers. If you go out and trap a muskrat, you got to check that trap every day or two. But you can put a trap net in Saginaw Bay, fill it with hundreds, if not thousands of walleye, which is not the intended harvest, and you don't have to check it. What's wrong with that?
We have been talking about this for decades as well. And what really needs to happen is a full modernization of our commercial fishing regulations. Our statute is decades and decades old, and it's a patchwork of regulations. There's some statutory authority, there's some in rules, there's some in director's orders in the DNR, and what you learned is exactly my understanding as well. We don't have net tending standards for our commercial licensed anglers, and we need that. We absolutely need that. And that was part of a bill package that was introduced back in 2019. It passed on a bipartisan basis in 2020. And then we just lost steam. COVID happened. We ran into some roadblocks, though, in the Senate. I mean, I was still down, even in the middle of COVID, coming down to testify on this commercial fishing statute because I knew if I didn't go in person, they wouldn't take me as seriously. So I was there in person all the time, several meetings, and we just could not pass that roadblock in the Senate. So we are back at it. We are absolutely committed to seeing this new package of legislation through. We are looking for sponsors right now. We have hopes that some here in the Saginaw Bay area will rise up to be a sponsor of this legislation as well, and we'll get it done this session.
Ross Elliott, friend of mine, has asked this question a couple of times. He really wants to get this out here. Why do bear tag number of tags get lowered when the quotas didn't get filled? My follow-up question, or maybe a different question to you, Amy Trotter, is what role does MUCC play, if any, in those types of regulation decisions?
So I'll start with that part of it first. So there's this bear forum every year that we go to where we learn about the harvest, the quotas, the intended harvest, and kind of what happened on the ground. And we talk as a bear hunting community with all the different major stakeholders around the state at this meeting. And really what they do in that meeting is what MUCC supports. So we support that process of engagement of the various hunting stakeholders around the table, talking about goals, talking about desired harvest, and then, coming to some consensus on that process. So that's what we support. We don't really get involved in whether there should be more tags in this unit or less tags in that unit. But as a result of those conversations, the formula is such that we are getting, data would suggest, better and better at harvesting bears in our state. And what that means is that even if you continue to sort of set that harvest goal at the same amount, you actually need less tags to get to that harvest goal because we are getting better and better at achieving that. And some of that is because we have great guides here in our state. So again, not back to the other conversation, I'm not knocking the profession at all. We have great guides here and they are helping us achieve those harvest objectives. But it is such that when we have those higher success rates, we actually need fewer tags to reach those harvest goals.
John Kramer says he was stationed in Saginaw Bay, conducted many patrols. Those nets are mostly non-selective and are devastating to our local aquatic environment. I don't think anybody can argue that with any amount of integrity or being serious at all. We got to get this situation under control, don't we, Amy?
Absolutely. So trap nets are slightly more selective than gill nets for sure, but not when you leave them out there and let the algae grow.
Yeah. Bonnie asked an interesting question. I hear you, and I've heard Nick Green on the radio show use this term before many times, and DNR uses it too. Stakeholders. Who are stakeholders? What group is this?
Well, when talking about bears, I'm talking about the diversity of hunting stakeholders around the state. So, MUCC has a seat there. The Michigan Hunting Dog Federation has a seat there. The bow hunters. So there's the diverse ways of bear hunting that are really represented around that circle. When we talk about other issues, we're working again, as I mentioned, with the charter boat captains, the steelheaders, with Trout Unlimited. So that's who I work with, my membership, as well as all of those other conservation organizations. What I usually don't mean are the non-consumptive users. So to be frank, we don't have, the Humane Society of the United States or people that are actively anti-hunting engaged in those conversations about our hunting seasons. To me, that makes sense. If we were talking about broad, how to reduce bear nuisance complaints, maybe then that makes sense to have some of the general public involved in those conversations. But when we're talking about bear hunting, we talk about bear hunters as stakeholders.
Justin makes an interesting point. If this is true, he says a commercial hunting organization participates in the Bear Forum. Is Is that true? And should that be the case?
That is actually true. That's a good point. So it isn't just the hunters. He is correct. They are the ones that are the most vocal about the nuisance bear complaints, and so they would rather, as some hunters see, significantly higher tags being available, and them having private land bear tags to do what they want with.
Well, and a couple of those points, I'm going to have to agree with the commercial honey people. Number one, I love their product, and I'd love to see more bear tags too. But I'm not a biologist, so all right, Amy. Speaking of biology and big game species in Michigan, I had Chad Stewart of the DNR. I interviewed him this morning for the radio show this weekend, and the main topic of discussion was the proposed deer regulations for this fall of 23. I know nothing has been formally adopted, but there are some proposals out there. What does MUCC think of this?
These are issues. So again, MUCC is a grassroots organization. So we represent our membership, and there is no greater diversity of opinion than among deer hunters. And and that's the case. And MUCC we actually have a super majority required for us to advocate for something at the NRC. So we need 2/3 of our membership to agree on something to be able to address it in that forum. On deer, there's a lot of issues we don't have 2/3 majority on. We have 50-50 majority on, or 51-49. But that isn't sufficient to really give us any marching orders. So we support data-driven decisions. We have expressed our concern a little bit for the harvest reporting system, where we want to be able to allow a little bit more time for harvest reporting, especially for people in northern Michigan and the UP that don't have cell phone coverage, to be able to report their deer harvest. So we have expressed that desire to give us a little more time and maybe a little less specificity on the pin drop in the app. So those are some things that we've been talking about. But as it relates to, some of the proposals, which is to allow youth more than one deer tag during the youth season, but only for does. So they would have the ability to take one buck and unlimited does based on how many, tags they purchase. So that's a proposal from the department. We don't have policy on that, though. So we are simply looking at these issues and then trying to communicate to our members that if they want their voice heard on those issues, they need to engage directly with the NRC, because our membership hasn't really tackled a lot of these tough ones because we don't have a supermajority.
A comment from my buddy Johnny Bowler, the Bear Whisperer. He says, me, Mike, what I'd like to say is I feel like they keep track of bear numbers like they do wolves in the UP. Sorry, not sorry. I think what Johnny's saying is, I'll rephrase this question to you, Amy. Are you confident with the numbers that DNR comes up with for bear population, wolf population, whitetail population, that turkey population, those types of numbers?
Well, it's interesting that you threw in turkey there, because they don't have a population projection actually for turkey. We learned that when we started talking about 2 turkey tags. They know the trends in harvest, and they know the level of effort that turkey hunters make. And then they try to sort of back calculate these estimates of populations from that, which isn't actually population data. It's based on harvest. So we have a lot more to go on turkeys in terms of knowing our turkey population. On bear, I do believe they've done a lot of that research. They have done lots of different types of studies, and that has had mandatory reporting, mandatory registration for a number of years. So they do have a good sense of the harvest and that level of effort. I have heard all about the nuisance complaints, and I think, they have tried to address those in a variety of ways. But again, because we are getting better and better at killing bears, that's part of it, is just using that harvest success rates in our calculations. What we don't want to do is over harvest bear and then spend another decade trying to rehabilitate that process. So it's better to be conservative than kind of over harvest.
Amy, a lot of people agreeing with Johnny Bowler's comments. it seems that there is a certain percentage of our Michigan hunters and anglers who don't have faith in the DNR, some even a mistrust of the DNR. Do you think that is a valid concern? And is it a concern as far as keeping the trust of hunters, keeping the DNR stakeholders, keeping their confidence?
It's tough to say. So I think effectively communicating difficult scientific data is hard, and I don't think the DNR does it very well. So I think that's part of it. Is some of it gets lost in translation, and some people are just not going to trust the government no matter what anyway, probably.
Right.
But it is a poor communication. I mean, take for example wolves. They've been for years now stating that we have whatever it is, 600 and then 700 wolves. And what they failed to ever do in those press releases is say the rest of the sentence, that that is the minimum winter population before they have pups, before they, grow exponentially then in the spring and throughout the summer when all the sightings are. But they only count that winter population, and they never explain that enough. So people have been tracking this very low number because we were managing based on endangered species status. We had to make sure we were over 200 so they weren't listed again. We're not there anymore, and we really need to reframe how we talk about populations when we're managing a full population and we're not on the brink of extinction anymore. So it's a lot about communications, and I don't think the DNR has doing that great of a job in it. I know that we've given them that feedback directly, so anyone listening should probably not be surprised from the DNR to hear that from me. But we are trying to help them be more effective in those communications and try to break down some of these. Stats is a class I took in college too, but not everybody did. So.
I was one of them who did not, and I'm not interested in stats. So I'm glad people like you are. Amy, we're going to let you go here in just a minute, but I want to remind people who you are. You are Amy Trotter, Executive Director of MUCC. And I'll throw out one last opportunity. If somebody has a question for Amy Trotter, post it right now, because I'm going to let her go very, very soon. And Amy, the last question from me then is more about MUCC, this grassroots organization, and tell me why should we get off our couch, get off our chair, get out of this office chair and go join MUCC? What's the benefit? I get the benefits to society and to conservation. Is there a benefit to me as an individual? What do I get out of it?
Well, I think as an individual, just being in the know of when these decisions are being made, knowing before they're made so that you have time to actually engage in them. A lot of people like to, challenge what has been done after the fact. But being in the arena, that's what you are when you join MUCC. You're in the arena when decisions are happening so that you can actually influence them. And that's the beauty. And that's why I love what I do, is because I'm in the arena day in and day out. We don't always get it right. We don't always get it 100% of what we want, but you have to be in the arena to be in the fight to try. And that's what you're getting with MUCC is you're in the arena, you're understanding, you're getting those regular communications, action alerts when that voice is needed. And even if MUCC isn't taking a position, you're in the know when those decisions are happening. We do a preview, we do a recap of all the different meetings. We're sending out information on a regular basis. There's a great magazine as well. I didn't mention that, but we've got that too. There's great stories out there, and we try to bring that to life for people and in telling them, and yes, there is some good in the hunting and fishing world too. There absolutely is. We run a youth camp. So by joining MUCC, we are creating the next generation of conservation stewards as well. We are doing habitat projects. There is a lot of great movement in the world. We are doing these kinds of things. I was supposed to talk for Ken Dalton. He wanted me to talk about pheasants today. He's one of my grassroots members that really pushed for the new pheasant license. And that is why we have birds going on the ground during pheasant season on several different game areas this fall. And that was really part of the MUCC policy process. Is a guy like Ken can have an idea, join MUCC, put it through, and we're going to have more pheasant hunting opportunities on state lands this year because of it.
Last question before we let you go. Any movement? Well, is MUCC in support of a Michigan sandhill crane hunt?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The data and the science supports it. We're just trying to get the NRC to step off and take it on.
All right, Amy, listen, I certainly appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And we will do this again in another couple of months coming down the road, and we will be sure to let people know that ahead of time. The website for MUCC, mucc.org. Please consider joining. It's just a few bucks a year. And as you can see from Amy, you guys do a great job, Amy. Always a pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody.
All right, have a good night, Amy. Amy Trotter, Executive Director of MUCC. Michael, yeah, the ribeye of the sky, they call sandhill cranes. Isn't it fun to have these conversations with Amy Trotter? Hey, Ace, how you doing tonight, buddy? Always a pleasure to hear from you. Cliff says, thanks for talking to us tonight, Amy. Amy does a great job, but I am, Eric says he joined the last time she was on. Casey says, good job, Amy. Everybody likes Amy. She's a very likable person. I think she's the right person to be at the helm of that organization right now, because I think she can get under people's skin and they look at her and go, she's just so nice. I'm not going to get mad at her. Lisa says she's joining because of this conversation. Davina says, Amy is great. Stacy says, nice turkey. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. James joined last time she was on. Okay, I got about 4 more minutes. I'm going to wrap this thing up. So I need to do, Casey works with the DNR. Nice. Let me tell you who's coming up on the Outdoor Magazine radio show this week. I mentioned during our conversation with Amy that Chad Stewart joins me in the first hour to talk about these proposed deer hunting regulations for the fall of 23. James says, how can I order one of those MUCC fleece jackets? I don't know the answer to that for sure, but I would say go to mucc.org, mucc.org. There you can sign up to become a member. And I think they've got swag you can get there too. So maybe one of those cool MUCC's fleece jackets. She is always interesting. Then in our second hour, we're talking fishing with Eric Long of Longline Charters. He fishes Lake St. Clair. Then Nick Green of MUCC joins me to talk about some issues they're working on. And he follows up to complete the Ask Avery segment where he talks about, he walks us, somehow no sound. I don't know what happened. I think it's you, Johnny. I think you're probably watching from Andy's. No time to get into that tonight, Stu, but Amy did talk about it. And then Jason says he hears Johnny. You got to leave Andy's if you're going to hear me. Oh, Brent says it's in and out periodically. I don't know why. And then Al Stewart talks about late season pheasant hunting. Plus, he also talks about the Nimrod Society, the Nimrod Education Society at Hillsdale College. I'm telling you what, I am a huge fan of Hillsdale College and what they're doing there and their pro shooting and pro hunting activities that are going on there. They're doing a great job. And of course, we wrap it all up with Wild Game Chef Extraordinaire, Dixie Dave Miner. And this time he is a pheasant breast recipe. All right. Oh, see, most people can hear me. Emil can hear me. I think it's just you, Andy. I think it's just you, Johnny. And Johnny got me back. Johnny, I didn't take your comments as being rude to Amy at all. I thought they were legitimate comments, and you saw how many people agreed with you. There is a lack of trust from some people towards DNR. There's just no doubt about it. All right, so I think we're going to wrap this up again. Thank you to Amy Trotter of MUCC, their website, mucc.org, mucc.org. I used to say use the promo code Mike and save some money. When it's only $35 to join, I have a hard time saying use the promo code Mike. Tony says, can we vote to ban Josh Revard from Skinny Water? Yes, we can. Josh says, whose nets were those with the walleye in them? They were up in Wigwam Bay, and it was from a non-Indian state licensed commercial fishing family that was third generation. And again, he didn't break any laws because there are no laws that say you have to pull those nets during a given period of time. If you put out a muskrat trap, I think in the lower peninsula, you have to check it every day. In the UP, it's every other day or something like that. But if you put out a trap net that is supposed to let fish in and out, but doesn't always do that, and there's no saying, so I'm not even going to, well, yeah, Tony, there needs to be some kind of change in regulations. If you're going to put a device out there in the water that in theory can trap and kill non-targeted species, because walleye, somebody asked the question earlier, when will walleye be considered a sport fish? Walleye are considered a game fish in Michigan right now. Cliff is getting ready for his after live beverage. So am I. Josh says, yes, down here it is daily. But the commercial fishermen don't have to check their nets. There's no regulation. And if you saw the video, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of dead walleye in those shallow water trap nets. So if you want to change something like that, the way you do it is you get on your legislators. Get in touch with your state rep or your state senator in Lansing and tell them you think it's baloney. All right, my friends, that's going to wrap up this edition of Wednesday Night Live. Johnny says, maybe we can trap a bear, and if it's not of legal size, we'll let it go for you. Johnny, I just want to see a bear when I'm hunting with you. Well, I did see one bear when I was hunting with you, but you let. Josh says he needs to get in that skinny water. Oh, here's what I have to do before we go. Can't believe I almost forgot this. That's how we wrap up Wednesday Night Live. Again, a big thank you to Amy Trotter of MUCC for joining me tonight. MUCC.org is their website, MUCC.org. My name is Mike Avery, and my website is MikeAveryOutdoors.com. My email address is Mike@MikeAveryOutdoors.com. And I would encourage you to use that email address to get in touch with me. Questions, comments, concerns, criticisms, things you would like to see covered on the show, things you are sick of seeing covered on the show. And if you say you're sick of seeing Saginaw Bay walleye talked about, that's going to fall on deaf ears. All right, my friends, have a good night. Thank you, Amy Trotter, and thank you for joining me on this edition of